Imagine standing at the edge of a dusty road in the year 500 CE. The sun is just beginning to rise over the eastern horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. You're in the city of Chang'an, the capital of China, and around you, the world is slowly coming to life. A caravan is preparing to depart. Dozens of camels are being loaded with bundles of silk, rolls of fabric so fine and smooth that it catches the early morning light like water. Merchants are checking their goods one last time. Guards are adjusting their weapons. Translators are going over their phrase books, preparing to switch between Chinese, Sogdian, Persian, and half a dozen other languages they'll need on the journey ahead. Where are they going? West, always west, following a route that isn't really a single road at all, but a vast network of paths, tracks and trails stretching over 4,000 miles, connecting the markets of China to the bazaars of Persia, the trading posts of Central Asia, and eventually to the Mediterranean shores, where Roman merchants wait with gold coins and desperate desire for Eastern luxuries. This is the Silk Road. And tonight, we're going to walk every mile of it together. But here's what most people don't understand about the Silk Road. It wasn't what you think. There was no single merchant who travelled from one end to the other. No caravanserais with a sign saying Silk Road this way. No unified system of trade managed by some ancient corporation. The Silk Road worked because of thousands of small decisions made by individual traders, each one travelling a relatively short distance, each one knowing their own section of the route intimately, each one passing goods to the next trader down the line, like runners in a relay race that stretched across continents. A bolt of silk didn't travel from China to Rome. It travelled from Chang'an to Dunhuang, then from Dunhuang to Kashgar, from Kashgar to Samarkand, from Samarkand to Merv, from Merv to Baghdad, from Baghdad to Antioch, from Antioch to Constantinople, and finally, maybe, to Rome. At each stop, the silk changed hands. New merchants took over. New languages were spoken. New currencies exchanged. The price increased a little bit each time, like a game of telephone, where instead of a message getting garbled, the cost just kept going up. And it wasn't just silk, despite the name. Ideas travelled this road. Religions spread along these routes. Buddhism, moving east from India into China. Islam eventually spreading east from Arabia. Christianity is reaching unexpected corners of Central Asia. Technologies passed from culture to culture. Paper-making secrets slipped out of China. Gunpowder formulas travelled west. Mathematical concepts from India reached the Islamic world, and eventually Europe. So tonight, as you let yourself relax and drift towards sleep, we're going to experience what it was really like. Not the simplified story you learned in school, but the messy, complicated, fascinating reality of how the Silk Road actually worked. We'll start in Chang'an, in the workshops where silk was made. We'll follow a caravan west through the deserts and mountains. We'll stop at the caravanserais, those fortified inns that dotted the route. We'll navigate the politics of the kingdoms and empires that controlled different sections. We'll meet the merchants, the translators, the caravan leaders, the monks, the spies, and the bandits who all made their living on this ancient highway of commerce. Let your breathing slow, let your body sink into comfort, and let's begin the journey. The greatest city in the world, our story, begins in Chang'an. And if you lived in the 7th or 8th century CE, during the Tang dynasty, this was quite simply the greatest city in the world. Over 1 million people lived here. The city stretched for miles in every direction, surrounded by walls so massive that you could drive a chariot along the top. But let's start smaller. Let's start in a workshop in the eastern part of the city, just as dawn breaks. The workshop belongs to a family that's been producing silk for 3 generations. The father, Master Ju, is already awake, checking on the silkworms in their trays. These aren't just any silkworms. These are the family's wealth, their livelihood, their ticket to prosperity in a city that runs on commerce. Silkworms are strange creatures if you really think about it. They're the caterpillar stage of a moth that humans domesticated so long ago that it can't survive in the wild anymore. They eat mulberry leaves. Nothing else will do. Just mulberry leaves. And they eat constantly, growing from something the size of an ant to something the size of your finger in about a month. And then they spin cocoons. That's what we're really after, the cocoons. Each cocoon is made from a single thread of silk fibre, produced by the caterpillar from glands in its mouth. One thread, up to 1,000 meters long, wrapped around and around to form the cocoon. Master Jew walks through the racks of trays where thousands of silkworms are munching on fresh mulberry leaves. The sound is oddly loud. Thousands of tiny jaws working, a rustling, crunching sound that fills the room. His daughter follows him, checking each tray, looking for any signs of disease. One sick silkworm can infect an entire tray, and they can't afford that kind of loss. The cocoons are ready. That means today is harvest day. But here's the thing about harvesting silk cocoons. You have to kill the caterpillar inside. If you let it complete its metamorphosis, the moth will break through the cocoon to emerge, cutting the silk thread into useless short pieces. So the cocoons, with the living caterpillar still inside, are placed in hot water or steam to kill the creature and loosen the silk. It's not pleasant work, but it's necessary. Once the cocoons are processed, the real skill comes in. Workers, usually women, as this work has always been considered women's domain, carefully find the end of the silk thread on each cocoon and begin to unwind it. This is delicate work. The thread is incredibly fine, so fine that you need to combine threads from several cocoons together to make a single strand strong enough to weave. The thread is wound onto reels, then twisted together with other threads to create stronger yarn. And then, finally, it goes to the weavers. Master Jew's workshop doesn't do the weaving themselves. They produce raw silk thread and sell it to specialized weaving workshops elsewhere in the city. These workshops have massive looms operated by skilled craftspeople who can create patterns of incredible complexity, dragons and phoenixes, clouds and mountains, flowers and geometric designs. The finest silk, the imperial quality silk, is reserved by law for the emperor and his court. It's illegal for commoners to wear certain patterns or colors, but there are many grades of silk below that top tier, and there's a huge market for all of it. Some silk stays in China, of course. Wealthy Chinese merchants and officials wear silk robes. Buddhist monasteries use silk for ceremonial purposes, but a substantial portion is destined for export, and that's where our story really begins. The merchant's calculation in another part of Chang'an. A merchant named Wei is making calculations. He's seated in his private office, an abacus in front of him, scrolls of accounts spread across his desk. Wei is what you might call a wholesaler. He doesn't produce anything himself. Instead, he buys goods, primarily silk, but also other luxury items like porcelain and lacquerware, and sells them to the merchants who will actually transport them west. The economics are complicated, and Wei has to get them exactly right. Buy too high, and he can't make a profit when he resells. Buy too low, and the producers won't sell to him. He needs to maintain good relationships with the workshop owners like Master Jew, but he also needs to drive hard bargains. And then there's the question of what grades of silk to buy. The finest quality commands the highest prices in the West, but it's also the most expensive to purchase here in Chang'an. The profit margin might actually be better on medium-grade silk, which costs less to buy, but can still be sold for a substantial markup in foreign markets. Wei has been in this business for 20 years. His father was a silk merchant before him. He knows the markets, knows the traders, knows which caravan leaders are reliable and which ones are likely to disappear with your goods. Today, he's negotiating with a Sogdian merchant named Buniat. The Sogdians, People from the region of Sogdiana in Central Asia, around what's now Uzbekistan, were the true masters of Silk Road trade. They were the middlemen, the translators, the cultural brokers, who could operate equally well in Chinese, Persian and Turkic contexts. Bunyat speaks fluent Chinese, though with an accent. He's been coming to Chang'an for 15 years, making the journey from his home city of Samarkand and back, trading Chinese goods for Western products and vice versa. He's wealthy by the standards of his hometown, but here in Chang'an, he's just one merchant among thousands. I need quality this trip, Bunyat explains to Wei. Not the imperial grade, obviously, but good solid merchandise. The Persian merchants in Merv are very particular. They have clients in Baghdad who know silk, who can tell the difference between good and mediocre. Wei nods. He's heard this before, but he lets Bunyat talk. Sometimes you learn useful things about market conditions in the West. I can offer 400 taels of silver for a standard load, Bunyat says. 20 bolts of high-grade silk, 10 of the embroidered type with the phoenix pattern if you can get it. Wei does the calculation in his head. 400 taels of silver. He can buy that much silk for about 320 taels if he negotiates well with the workshops. That's an 80 tael profit, minus storage fees, inspection fees, and the various taxes and bribes he'll have to pay. It's a decent margin, but not spectacular. On the other hand, Bunyat is reliable. He pays on time, his credit is good, and he's never tried to cheat Wei on quality complaints after the fact, which some merchants do. I can do this, Wei says finally, but I need 2 weeks to assemble the order, and I want 420 taels. The negotiation continues. This is how it works, always. Every transaction is a negotiation, a balancing of relationships and profit, of trust and verification. The caravan assembles. 2 weeks later, in the great western market of Chang'an, a caravan is forming. The market is enormous, covering several city blocks. Different sections specialize in different goods. Silk has its area, porcelain another, food and animals another. There's a section where foreign merchants congregate, where you can hear Persian and Sogdian and Turkic languages mixing with Chinese. Bunyat has assembled his caravan. He's not traveling alone. No one does that on the Silk Road. It's far too dangerous. Instead, he's organized a group of about 30 camels, 15 men, and assorted supplies for a journey that will take them from Chang'an to Samarkand, a distance of roughly 2,500 miles that will require about 4 to 5 months of travel. The camels are Bactrian camels, the two-humped variety that's perfectly adapted for the cold deserts and mountain passes they'll cross. Each camel can carry about 400 pounds of cargo, and they're far more reliable than horses in the harsh conditions ahead. They can go for days without water, survive on the scrubby vegetation of the desert, and handle both the scorching heat of summer days and the freezing cold of winter nights. The caravan includes Bunyat and 2 other Sogdian merchants who are pooling their resources for safety. There are also caravan guards, experienced men with weapons who've made this journey before. There are camel handlers who know the animals intimately. There are servants to handle the daily tasks of setting up and breaking camp. And there's a guide, an old man named Quang, who has travelled the eastern section of the Silk Road for 40 years and knows every water source, every caravanserais, every potential danger. The loading process is methodical. Each bale of silk is wrapped in oiled cloth to protect it from rain and dust. The bales are then carefully balanced on the camels' backs, distributed evenly so the animals won't develop sores from uneven loads. Other supplies are loaded: food for the journey, tents, cooking equipment, spare ropes and straps, weapons, and crucially, trade goods to use as currency along the way. You see, you can't just carry silver for the entire journey. It's too heavy and too attractive to bandits. Instead, merchants carry goods that can be traded at each stop. Smaller, more portable items like tea, medicinal herbs, small pieces of jade, metal goods. These can be used to buy food, pay fees, or bribe officials when necessary. Finally, after days of preparation, the caravan is ready to depart. It's early morning, the coolest part of the day. The city gates have just opened, and with a shout from the lead camel handler, the caravan begins to move. Chang'an slowly falls away behind them. Ahead lies the road west, and everything it contains. Leaving civilization behind, the first few days of travel are actually quite pleasant. The road from Chang'an heads northwest, through settled territory, through the agricultural heartland of Tang China. There are villages every few miles, inns where the caravan can stay, markets where they can buy fresh food. But everyone knows this is temporary. Ahead lies the Hexi corridor, a narrow strip of habitable land squeezed between the Tibetan plateau to the south and the mountains of Mongolia to the north. And beyond that, the Taklamakan desert, whose very name in the Turkic languages means go in and you won't come out. Let's talk about the geography for a moment, because it's crucial to understanding how the Silk Road worked. The Silk Road wasn't one road, but multiple routes, and they all had to navigate the same fundamental problem: how to get from China to Central Asia when there's a huge expanse of some of the most inhospitable terrain on Earth in the way. The Taklamakan desert is massive, about 1,000 kilometers from east to west. It's a sand desert, but not the rolling dunes you might picture from movies about the Sahara. In many places, it's flat, covered in salt flats and gravel. Water is scarce. Temperatures swing wildly, scorching hot during the day, freezing cold at night. Sandstorms can arise without warning, disorienting even experienced travelers. No one crosses straight through the middle of the Taklamakan. It's simply not possible to carry enough water. Instead, the Silk Road splits into two main routes that go around the northern and southern edges of the desert, following the foothills where snowmelt from the mountains creates oases, precious spots of green in an otherwise dead landscape. But before reaching those routes, caravans have to traverse the Hexi corridor, and that's where Bunyat's caravan is headed now. The Hexi corridor, lifeline and bottleneck. The Hexi corridor is a geographical feature that shaped Chinese history for thousands of years. It's a narrow strip of land, in places only about 100 miles wide, stretching for about 600 miles from the Chinese heartland towards Central Asia. To the south are the mountains of the Tibetan plateau, a barrier so formidable that very little trade went that direction. To the north are the Mongolian steppes, home to nomadic peoples who were sometimes trading partners, sometimes raiders, and sometimes conquerors of China itself. The corridor follows the route of several small rivers fed by mountain snowmelt. These rivers create a chain of oases: Wuwei, Jiangye, Juquan, Dunhuang. Each oasis became a trading city, a military garrison, a last stop before the desert, a first stop after surviving it. Bunyat's caravan reaches the city of Wuwei after about 2 weeks of travel from Chang'an. This is still clearly Chinese territory. Chinese soldiers man the walls. Chinese officials collect taxes. Buddhist monasteries dot the landscape, their pagodas visible for miles. They rest here for 3 days, not just to let the animals recover, but to gather information. Bunyat visits the tea houses where merchants gather to trade news. What are the conditions ahead? Has there been rain, creating more water sources, or drought, making the journey more dangerous? Are there reports of bandits? How are relations between the Chinese authorities and the nomadic peoples whose territory they'll have to pass through? One evening, Bunyat sits with another merchant, a Chinese man named Li, who's headed west with his own caravan carrying tea and porcelain. The word is, the route is clear as far as Dunhuang, Li says, sipping his tea. After that, he shrugs. The Turfan region is having some kind of political dispute. 2 local rulers claiming authority. They're not fighting yet, but both are demanding taxes from passing caravans. Bunyat grimaces. This is one of the constant problems of Silk Road trade. You're passing through territories controlled by different authorities, each one wanting a cut. Sometimes the same section of road is claimed by multiple authorities, and you end up paying taxes twice. There's no international law to appeal to, no higher authority to settle disputes. You either pay or you try to find another route, or you risk travelling without permission and hoping you don't get caught. How much are they demanding? Bunyat asks. 5% of cargo value, both of them. That's robbery, Lee laughs. That's the Silk Road. Though I hear if you can prove you already paid one of them, sometimes the other will accept a smaller payment. Or sometimes they'll demand more. It depends on their mood, how much money they need, whether they're trying to make a point to each other. This is the reality of long-distance trade in the ancient world. It's not just about transporting goods. It's about navigating politics, managing relationships, knowing when to negotiate and when to pay without arguing, when to take a risk and when to play it safe. Dunhuang, the last stop before the desert after another month of travel, the caravan reaches Dunhuang, and this is where things get serious. Dunhuang sits at the far western end of the Hexi corridor, right at the point where the route splits into the northern and southern roads around the Taklamakan desert. It's a major trading city, a military garrison, and a religious center. The famous Mogao caves are here, hundreds of Buddhist cave temples carved into a cliff face, filled with paintings and statues, supported by donations from merchants who stopped here to pray for safe passage through the desert ahead. Bunyat's caravan stays in Dunhuang for a week. This isn't just a rest stop. This is serious preparation time. First, supplies. They need to stock up on everything they'll need for the desert crossing. Water, of course, carried in large leather bags, but also food for both humans and animals, spare ropes and harnesses, extra clothing for the temperature extremes, medical supplies for the various ailments that can strike in the desert. Second, information. This is crucial. The desert routes aren't static. Sand dunes shift. Water sources can dry up. Political situations change. Bunyat spends his days talking to merchants who've recently come from the west, asking detailed questions about conditions on the road. Which route is safer right now, northern or southern? Where are the reliable water sources? Are there any new settlements or caravanserais? Any reports of bandits? What about the local rulers along the route? Are they being reasonable with taxes and fees, or are they being difficult? The consensus is that the northern route is better at this time of year. It's longer, but there are more established caravanserais, more reliable water sources. The southern route is more direct, but more dangerous, with longer stretches between water sources. Third, spiritual preparation. Bunyat is not particularly religious, but he's practical, and he knows that in the desert, you need all the help you can get. He visits the Buddhist caves and makes an offering, lighting incense and saying a prayer. Some of his men are Buddhist, others follow various Central Asian religious traditions. Some are Christian. Yes, there were Christians this far east, members of the Nestorian Church that had spread along the Silk Road. Each finds their own way to ask for protection. The night before they depart, Bunyat can't sleep. He's made this journey 8 times before, and it never gets easier. The desert is always dangerous, always unpredictable. He's known merchants who disappeared out there, their caravans found weeks later, half buried in sand, the camels dead, the men dead, the cargo scattered. But he's also known merchants who made fortunes on this route, and he has responsibilities, partners waiting in Samarkand, debts to pay, a family to support. So when dawn comes, he rises, checks his preparations one more time, and gives the order to move out. The desert awaits. Into the Taklamakan, the first thing you notice when you enter the desert is the silence. In the settled lands, there's always noise. Birds, insects, wind in the trees, water flowing, people talking. But in the desert, especially in the vast flat areas between oases, there's just silence. The wind sometimes, but even that has a different quality, a hollow sound that seems to emphasize the emptiness rather than fill it. The caravan travels in the early morning and late afternoon, stopping during the hottest part of the day to rest in whatever shade they can create with their tents and traveling again in the evening. Sometimes they travel at night when the moon is full, taking advantage of the cooler temperatures. The landscape is otherworldly. In some places, the ground is covered in fine sand that seems to shift and flow like water. In others, it's hard-packed gravel that crunches under the camel's feet. There are places where the wind has carved the rocks into strange shapes, formations that look like animals or castles or giants frozen in stone. And there are the mirages. On hot days, you can see what looks like lakes in the distance, shimmering pools of water that disappear as you approach. Even experienced travelers can be fooled by these illusions, can waste precious time and energy heading toward water that doesn't exist. The caravan's guide, Old Kwang, navigates by landmarks that would be invisible to an untrained eye. A particular shaped rock formation, a cluster of dead trees, ancient weathered trunks that have stood here for who knows how long. The direction of sand dunes, which follow prevailing wind patterns, the stars at night, the sun's position during the day, and he navigates by something else too, his memory of where the water sources are. Every 3 or 4 days, the caravan reaches an oasis. These vary widely in size and prosperity. Some are just small springs with a few trees, barely enough to water the camels and refill the water bags. Others are substantial settlements, small towns built around reliable water sources, with markets and inns and all the infrastructure needed to support the constant flow of caravans. At one oasis called Miran, they encounter another caravan coming from the west. This is valuable, a chance to exchange information about road conditions, to trade news, sometimes to trade goods. The other caravan is led by a Persian merchant named Bahram. He's heading east toward China with goods from the west, glassware from Syria, precious stones from Badakhshan, medicines and spices from India. Over tea in the shade of some struggling trees, Bunyat and Bahram compare notes. "How's the route west?" Bunyat asks. "Passable. We had some trouble near Khotan, bandits in the hills. Lost 2 camels, but we made it through." This is troubling news. Khotan is a major oasis city that Bunyat's caravan will pass through. If bandits are active in the area, they'll need to be extra careful, maybe even hire additional guards. What kind of bandits? Local tribesmen or organized groups? Organized, I think. They knew what they were doing, knew where to set the ambush, but they weren't particularly violent. They took some goods and let us pass. Could have been much worse. This is actually somewhat reassuring. Professional bandits often operate on a kind of rational calculation. They take enough to make the raid worthwhile, but not so much that they kill the trade entirely. Dead merchants don't come back with more goods to steal. It's the desperate bandits, or the ones motivated by ideology or revenge, rather than profit, who are truly dangerous. The 2 merchants trade for a while, each taking some goods from the other. This kind of mid-route trading is common. Bahram is willing to part with some of his Persian goods here, because he can get a better price from Bunyat, who understands their value, than he might get at the unpredictable markets further east. And Bunyat can offload some of his silk, reducing his load, making the camel's journey easier. They part ways with mutual wishes for safe travels. In the desert, you don't wish for success or profit, you wish for survival. The caravanserais, after weeks in the desert, the caravan reaches a substantial oasis settlement with a proper caravanserai, a fortified inn specifically built to serve travelling merchants. Let's stop here for a moment and really understand what a caravanserai was, because these institutions were absolutely crucial to making the Silk Road work. A caravanserai was part fortress, part inn, part marketplace. The typical design was a square building surrounding a large courtyard. The outer walls were thick and high, with few windows. This was for defense against bandits. A single large gate allowed entry, which could be barred at night. Inside the courtyard, there was space for the camels and other animals. Around the edges of the courtyard, at ground level, were stables and storage, rooms where goods could be locked up securely. On the upper level, reached by stairs, were sleeping rooms for the merchants and their men. Some caravanserais were quite luxurious by the standards of the road. They had kitchens where hot meals could be prepared, bathhouses where travellers could wash off the dust of the desert, even small mosques or temples for prayer. Others were much more basic, just the bare walls and roof, with travellers expected to provide their own food and bedding. This particular caravanserai is mid-range. It's run by a Sogdian family that's operated it for 3 generations. The current owner, a man named Rustam, greets Bunyat warmly. They've met before on previous trips. "Bunyat, good to see you survived another crossing. Come in, come in. We have space in the northwest corner for your animals. I'll put you and your men in the upper rooms. There's a fee, of course. Everything on the Silk Road has a price, but it's reasonable and the security is good." Rustam doesn't allow weapons to be carried in the sleeping areas. They must be stored in the armory. This prevents drunken fights from turning deadly. He also has guards who patrol the walls at night. The caravanserai is about half full. There are 2 other caravans here. One that arrived the day before heading west. Another that's been here for 3 days, recovering from some illness that struck their men. That evening, everyone gathers in the common area for dinner. This is one of the social highlights of Silk Road travel, a chance to meet other merchants, to exchange not just goods and information, but stories. An older merchant named Jiang, who's made this journey more times than he can count, tells stories of the old days, of routes that used to exist but are now closed due to political changes, of legendary merchants who made impossible fortunes, of caravans that vanished into the desert and were never seen again. Someone asks about the supernatural dangers of the desert. This is a topic that everyone knows about, but not everyone likes to discuss openly. "The singing sands," Zhang says quietly. "I've heard them twice in my life. Once near Dunhuang, once further west near Lulan. A sound like voices, like music, coming from nowhere. The sand itself seems to sing. Some say it's the ghosts of travellers who died in the desert. Some say it's natural, something to do with how the wind moves the sand. I don't know, but I know it's deeply unsettling to hear it." Others nod. They've heard the stories. The desert is full of them. Ghost cities that appear in mirages. Spirits that lead travellers astray. Mysterious lights that dance in the distance at night. Bunyat doesn't comment. He's practical by nature, skeptical of supernatural explanations. But he's also lived long enough to know that the desert can do strange things to your mind. The isolation, the heat, the lack of water, these can create hallucinations, can make you see and hear things that aren't there. Or maybe they are there. In the desert, the line between the real and unreal becomes uncertain. The conversation continues late into the night. Tomorrow they'll leave early, and the next day, and the next, continuing the endless journey west. But for tonight, there's food and shelter and human companionship. And in the context of the Silk Road, that's a kind of luxury. Khotan, city of jade and silk. After another 2 weeks of desert travel, the caravan reaches Khotan, and suddenly they're back in civilization. Khotan is one of the major Oasis kingdoms along the Silk Road, and it's a fascinating place, a true crossroads of cultures. The population is ethnically mixed. Local Saka people, Chinese settlers, Sogdian merchants who've made the city their permanent home, Indian Buddhist monks, traders from everywhere. The city is built around a substantial oasis, fed by rivers flowing down from the Kunlun mountains. There are orchards of fruit trees, fields of grain, gardens and vineyards. Water flows through channels dug throughout the city, creating a pleasant atmosphere that must seem like paradise after weeks in the desert. But Khotan is famous for 2 products in particular, jade and silk. The jade comes from the rivers. For thousands of years, people have collected jade pebbles and boulders from the stream beds, stones that have tumbled down from the mountains, smoothed and polished by the water. Khotan jade is prized throughout China and Central Asia. It's carved into jewelry, ritual objects, decorative pieces, and silk. Khotan produces its own silk, and there's a legend about how that came to be. According to the story, many centuries ago, Khotan had no silkworms. Silk production was a jealously guarded Chinese secret, and it was illegal to export silkworms or the knowledge of how to raise them. But a Khotan king wanted to establish silk production in his kingdom. So he arranged to marry a Chinese princess, and he sent word to her that she should bring silkworm eggs and mulberry seeds hidden in her elaborate headdress, where the border inspectors wouldn't dare to search a royal bride. The princess did as requested, smuggling the silkworms out of China, and that's how Khotan became a silk-producing region. Whether the story is true or not, Khotan definitely produces silk by the time Bunyat's caravan arrives. It's not quite the same quality as Chinese silk, but it's good, and it's cheaper. Some merchants buy it here to mix with their Chinese silk, increasing their overall volume of goods while reducing their average cost. Bunyat has to make a decision. Should he spend time here, selling some of his Chinese silk and buying Khotan jade and other local goods, or should he push on? Every day spent not travelling is a day of expenses, feeding his men and animals, paying for accommodation, storage fees. He decides to stay for a week. There's a good market here, and he can make some profitable trades. Plus, he needs to hire additional guards for the next section of the route. Remember, Bahram mentioned bandits in this area. Extra security is worth the cost. The bazaar of Khotan, is a riot of colours and sounds and smells. Let's walk through it for a moment, because this is where the real business of the Silk Road happens. Different sections of the bazaar specialise in different goods. There's the silk market, of course, where merchants display bolts of fabric in every colour imaginable. The silk is draped and arranged to show off its quality, and merchants haggle intensely over every transaction. There's the jade market, where stones are displayed on cloth, organised by colour and size. Some are raw stones, just as they came from the river. Others have been carved and polished into finished products. Buyers examine each stone carefully, holding it up to the light, checking for flaws and imperfections. There's the food market, which is important too. Caravans need to resupply here. They buy dried fruits, nuts, grains, tea, spices. Some of these foods are local products. Others have come from far away themselves. Raisins from this oasis, walnuts from another, tea from China, spices from India. And there's the animal market, where camels, horses, donkeys, and other beasts of burden are bought and sold. This is crucial infrastructure for the Silk Road. Animals die on the route, get sick, get injured. Caravans need to replace them, and the price of animals varies considerably from one market to another, so there's profit to be made buying animals where they're cheap and selling them where they're expensive. Bunyat spends his days in the bazaar, making deals, gathering information, establishing and maintaining the relationships that make trade possible. One afternoon, he's approached by a stranger, a thin man with an intense expression, wearing the robes of a Buddhist monk, but with something that doesn't quite fit that identity. "You're heading west?" the man asks in accented Sogdian. "Eventually, yes. I need to travel to Samarkand. I can pay for passage with your caravan." Bunyat is immediately cautious. "What's your business in Samarkand?" "I'm a scholar. I study religious texts. There's a library in Samarkand I need to visit." This might be true, or this might be a spy. The kingdoms and empires along the Silk Road all sent spies and intelligence gatherers, people who travelled as merchants or monks or pilgrims, but who were really collecting information on trade routes, military strength, political situations. On the other hand, taking on additional paying passengers is a legitimate way to increase the profitability of Adi II other part at 1721, a caravan journey. And having a monk along might be good luck, or at least refusing might be bad luck. My fee is 50 silver coins for passage to Samarkand, including food and protection, but not luxury accommodation. That's expensive. So is dying in the desert alone. I'm leaving in 3 days. Decide before then. The monk nods and disappears back into the crowd of the bazaar. The politics of protection, one of the things that history books often don't explain clearly about the Silk Road, is how caravans dealt with the constant threat of bandits and raiders. It wasn't just a matter of hiring guards, though that was part of it. The reality was that different sections of the route were controlled by different authorities, kingdoms, tribal confederations, local warlords, sometimes religious institutions. And these authorities operated what was essentially a protection racket, though they didn't call it that. Here's how it worked. A caravan would approach the territory controlled by, say, a tribal confederation. The caravan leader would meet with representatives of the tribe and negotiate a fee. In exchange for this fee, the tribe would provide safe passage through their territory. They might even provide guides or additional guards. This was more than just paying a bribe. It was a formal business arrangement. The tribe had every incentive to make sure their section of the road was safe, because if caravans started getting robbed in their territory, merchants would find alternative routes, and the tribe would lose that income. Of course, sometimes the tribe themselves were the bandits, or there would be rogue elements within the tribe who didn't respect the agreements, or there would be disputes about which tribe controlled which section of territory, leading to situations where you had to pay multiple fees for the same stretch of road. In Khotan, Bunyat hires a local man named Ismail to serve as a diplomatic intermediary for the next section of their journey. Ismail knows the local power structures, speaks the languages, knows who to pay and how much to offer. His fee is substantial, but it's worth it to avoid potentially disastrous misunderstandings. There are 3 tribal groups you'll need to deal with before reaching Kashgar, Ismail explains. The first is straightforward. They have fixed rates, they're reliable. The second is trickier. They're currently in a dispute with the Khotan authorities, so they're being difficult with merchants. I recommend going around their territory if possible, even though it adds 4 days to the journey. And the third? The third is new. They've recently moved into the area, displaced from somewhere north by some conflict or don't fully understand. They're still figuring out how this whole protection fee system works. That makes them unpredictable. We'll need to approach them carefully, show proper respect, probably pay a bit more than they're technically entitled to as a gesture of goodwill. This is the real skill of Silk Road trading, not just buying and selling goods, but navigating these complex political and social situations. You need the judgment to know when to negotiate and when to simply pay what's asked. You need the cultural knowledge to show proper respect without showing weakness. You need the language skills to communicate clearly. You need the patience to deal with bureaucracy and the courage to sometimes take risks. The monk's story that evening. The mysterious monk approaches Bunyat again. He agrees to the fee and makes arrangements to join the caravan. Over the next few days, as they prepare to depart Khotan, Bunyat has several conversations with the monk, whose name turns out to be Xuanzang, though Bunyat suspects this might not be his real name. "Why Samarkand?" Bunyat asks one evening. "If you're interested in Buddhist texts, there are great libraries in Khotan itself, and certainly in the cities of China. I'm interested in how Buddhism changes as it travels," Xuanzang explains. The Buddha's teachings originated in India, but they've been translated and adapted as they spread into Chinese, into Central Asian languages, into the languages of the nomadic peoples. I want to study these adaptations, understand how the same teachings get interpreted differently in different cultural contexts. This actually makes sense. and it's a topic that would genuinely interest a scholar. The Silk Road wasn't just a conduit for goods, it was a conduit for ideas. Buddhism had spread from India to Central Asia and then to China, but it had transformed along the way, absorbing elements of local religions and philosophies, adapting to new cultural contexts. In China, Buddhism had merged with elements of Taoism and Confucianism. In Central Asia, it had mixed with Zoroastrianism and local shamanistic traditions. The Buddhism practiced in Khotan was different from the Buddhism practiced in Chang'an, which was different from the Buddhism practiced in India. And the same was true for other religions and ideas. Christianity had reached Central Asia via the Silk Road, but it was Nestorian Christianity, considered heretical by the Roman Church, with its own distinctive theology and practices. Islam would eventually spread along these same routes, transforming and being transformed by the cultures it encountered. Ideas travel like goods, Xuanzang says. They're traded, they're adapted, they change form to fit new contexts. A Buddhist text written in Sanskrit in India gets translated into Sogdian, then into Chinese. At each step, the translator makes choices about how to render concepts that don't exist in the target language. The result is something new, something that grows out of the original but isn't identical to it. Bunyat, listening to this, thinks about silk. Raw silk produced in China gets woven into cloth with Persian patterns in Samarkand. Chinese porcelain gets decorated with designs appealing to Persian or Arab tastes. Goods transform as they travel, adapting to new markets. Maybe ideas work the same way. Leaving the deserts, entering the mountain after leaving Khotan, the caravan continues west, passing through several more oasis settlements. But the geography is changing. The flat desert terrain is gradually giving way to foothills, and in the distance, mountains are becoming visible. These are the Pamir Mountains, sometimes called the roof of the world, where several of the world's greatest mountain ranges meet. The Himalayas, the Karakoram, the Hindu Kush, the Tian Shan. The peaks rise to incredible heights, many over 20,000 feet. The valleys between them are at altitudes that would be considered mountain peaks in most other parts of the world. The Silk Road had to cross these mountains. There was no way around them. And this section of the route was perhaps the most physically challenging of the entire journey. The caravan reaches the city of Kashgar, the last major settlement before the mountain crossing. This is another crucial trading hub, where the routes from China meet the routes going west towards Samarkand and south toward India. Kashgar is culturally distinct from the Chinese cities to the east. The population is primarily Turkic-speaking peoples, with significant Sogdian and Persian communities. Islamic influence is growing here, though Buddhism and other religions are still practiced. The architecture is different, more Central Asian than Chinese, with domed buildings and intricate geometric patterns. Here, Bunyat makes some major decisions about his cargo. The mountain crossing is difficult, and camels, while excellent for desert travel, are not ideal for mountain trails. He needs to transfer some of his goods to yaks, which are better suited to the high altitudes and steep paths. He also needs to hire local guides who know the mountain routes intimately. These routes are dangerous not just because of the terrain, but because of the weather. Snowstorms can strike suddenly, even in summer. The high altitude can cause sickness, headaches, difficulty, breathing, disorientation. There are places where the path is barely wide enough for a loaded animal to pass, with sheer drops on one side. Old Kwang, the guide who led them through the desert, won't continue past Kashgar. His expertise is in the desert routes, not the mountains. Instead, they hire a Waki guide named Daria, a member of one of the ethnic groups who live in the high valleys of the Pamirs. She's short and stocky, built for the thin air of high altitude, and she's made this crossing more than 100 times. How long? Bunyat asks her. To Samarkand? Maybe 6 weeks if the weather is good. 8 or 9 if we hit storms. Could be more if the passes are still blocked with snow, but at this time of year, they should be clear. What about bandits? Daria shakes her head. Not many in the mountains. Too hard to survive up there if you're not part of a local community. The real dangers are weather, altitude sickness, and accidents. Lost more people to falls and avalanches than to bandits. This is not reassuring, but it's the reality. Bunyat makes arrangements, pays fees, reorganizes his cargo. The caravan that leaves Kashgar heading into the mountains is different from the one that entered. Different animals, different guides, same merchants, same essential mission, into the heights. The first few days of the mountain crossing are manageable. They follow river valleys, gradually gaining altitude. The air gets cooler, thinner. Some of the men start experiencing headaches and shortness of breath. The altitude is affecting them. Daria recommends they slow down, take rest breaks more frequently, drink lots of water. Your body needs time to adjust, she explains. If we push too hard, someone will get really sick, and then we'll have to stop for days while they recover. Better to go slow and steady. The landscape is stark and beautiful. Grass-covered valleys surrounded by snow-capped peaks. Crystal-clear rivers fed by glacial melt. Herds of wild animals, mountain goats and sheep, creatures perfectly adapted to this harsh environment. They pass through settlements inhabited by the Pamiri peoples. Small villages of stone houses with flat roofs. Fields carved out of the valley floors, flocks of yaks and sheep grazing on the sparse vegetation. These communities survive on a combination of agriculture, animal husbandry, and income from Silk Road caravans. At each village, they pay fees for passage and buy supplies. Fresh yak milk and cheese, barley flour, dried meat. The villagers speak languages that Bunyat doesn't understand, and even Daria sometimes needs to use another interpreter to communicate. One evening, they camp near a Waki village, and the village elder invites them to share dinner. This is more than just hospitality. It's a diplomatic ritual, a way of establishing peaceful relationships. The meal is simple but hearty. Yak meat stewed with barley and vegetables, fresh bread baked that morning, fermented milk drink that tastes sour but is surprisingly refreshing. They eat sitting on rugs in the elder's house, a stone structure with a fire pit in the centre and a smoke hole in the roof. Through translation, the elder asks about news from the east. What's happening in China? How are trade conditions? Any wars or political upheavals? Bunyat shares what he knows, and in return, the elder provides information about the route ahead. There was an avalanche last month that blocked one of the high passes, but it's been cleared now. A stone bridge over a river was damaged in spring floods, but has been repaired. A new caravanserais has been built at a high-altitude lake, providing shelter where previously there was none. This exchange of information is crucial. The Silk Road functioned because of these informal networks of communication, merchants and guides, and local communities, all sharing knowledge about route conditions. The high passes. After 2 weeks of gradual climbing, they reached the high passes, and this is where the journey becomes truly challenging. The passes are at altitudes of 15,000 to 16,000 feet. At this height, every physical effort is difficult. Just walking requires concentration and willpower. The cold is intense, even in summer. Ice and snow cover the ground in shaded areas where the sun never reaches. The paths are narrow and treacherous. In many places, the trail is barely wide enough for a loaded yak to pass. On one side is the mountain wall, on the other a sheer drop of hundreds of feet. There are no guardrails, no safety measures. One misstep and you're gone. They travel slowly, carefully. Daria leads, testing the path ahead, making sure it's stable. The animals are nervous. They can sense the danger. The men are silent, concentrating on every step. And then there's the altitude sickness. Several of the men are experiencing severe symptoms: crushing headaches, nausea, disorientation. One man becomes so sick that they have to stop for 2 days while he recovers. They're camped at a place called a karaba, a stone shelter built for travellers, crude but better than nothing. Bunyat himself is feeling the effects: headache, trouble sleeping, a constant feeling of breathlessness. But he's experienced this before and knows it will pass once they descend. The mysterious monk, Xuanzang, seems almost unaffected by the altitude. He moves through the thin air as if it's nothing, which makes Bunyat even more suspicious about his true background. Monks from lowland China shouldn't be this comfortable at high altitude, not unless they've spent significant time in mountains before. One afternoon, they're crossing a particularly exposed section of trail when a sudden storm blows in. In minutes, visibility drops to almost nothing. Wind-driven snow stings exposed skin. The temperature plummets. Daria makes a quick decision. We can't continue. We need to find shelter immediately. There's a cave a short distance off the trail. Not a large cave, but enough to get the animals and people out of the worst of the storm. They crowd inside, humans and animals together, sharing body heat. The storm lasts for 6 hours. It's miserable, cold, cramped. No way to make a fire because the smoke would suffocate them in the enclosed space. But they survive. When the storm finally passes and they emerge, the landscape has been transformed. Fresh snow covers everything, making the trail even more treacherous. They proceed with extreme caution. It takes another week to cross the high passes and begin descending the western slopes of the Pamirs. As they descend, the air gradually thickens, becomes easier to breathe. The temperature moderates. The vegetation increases. First just lichens and moss, then hardy grasses, then eventually shrubs and trees. They've crossed the roof of the world. They've survived, descending into civilization after the harsh environment of the high mountains. The descent into the fertile valleys of Sogdiana feels like entering paradise. The geography changes dramatically. Instead of barren rock and ice, there are green valleys with flowing rivers. Orchards of fruit trees, apples, apricots, pomegranates. Fields of grain, villages and towns appearing with increasing frequency. And the culture changes too. They've left the Chinese sphere of influence far behind. They're entering the Iranian cultural world, though it's mixed with Turkic elements and increasingly influenced by Islam, which is spreading through the region. The caravan descends into the Fergana Valley, famous for its horses, the heavenly horses that Chinese emperors prize so highly. Then they continue west, following well-established roads now, passing through increasingly prosperous settlements. And then, one morning, from a hilltop, they see it. Samarkand. Even from a distance, it's impressive. The city sits in a fertile river valley, surrounded by orchards and gardens. Walls encircle it, and within those walls, buildings rise. Domes and towers, bazaars and palaces, mosques and caravanserais. This is one of the greatest cities of Central Asia, a trading hub where goods from China meet goods from Persia, where merchants from India encounter merchants from the steppes, where cultures and religions and languages mix and merge and create something new. Bunyat feels a wave of relief. He's made it. Nearly 5 months after leaving Chang'an, he's reached his destination. The silk he's been carrying all this way can finally be sold. The profits can be realized. The risks have, so far, paid off. The city of merchants, let's spend some time in Samarkand, because this city represents the Silk Road at its most vibrant and complex. Samarkand is a Sogdian city, and the Sogdians are the true masters of Silk Road trade. They're not just merchants, they're cultural translators, linguistic experts, financial innovators. They've created the systems that make long-distance trade possible. One of their key innovations is the use of credit instruments. Here's the problem. Carrying large amounts of silver or gold over long distances is dangerous and impractical. The weight alone is burdensome, and the risk of theft is enormous. So how do you conduct business across thousands of miles? The Sogdians developed a solution. A merchant in Samarkand could deposit money with a banking family and receive a written certificate. This certificate could then be presented to an affiliate of that banking family in, say, Chang'an, and the merchant could withdraw funds there. It was an early form of the letter of credit, and it made long-distance commerce much more practical. They also developed sophisticated partnership arrangements. A wealthy merchant might provide capital to a traveling merchant, with profits to be split according to an agreed-upon formula. Contracts detailed exactly what goods were to be bought and sold, what routes were to be taken, how disputes would be resolved, and they created trade diasporas, communities of Sogdian merchants living in major cities throughout the Silk Road network. A Sogdian merchant in Chang'an could do business with Sogdian merchants in Samarkand, Merv, Baghdad, and other cities, all speaking the same language, understanding the same business practices, often related by family ties or ethnic bonds. Bunyat heads to the Sogdian quarter of Samarkand, where he has family connections. His cousin Patak runs a trading company here, and they've done business together before. Patak's establishment is impressive, a large house with attached warehouses and offices, servants and clerks handling administrative work, guards providing security. This is the headquarters of a successful trading operation. The reunion is warm. They haven't seen each other in over a year, and there's family news to catch up on, gossip to share, business to discuss. How was the journey? Patak asks. Long, difficult, expensive, but we made it. And the goods? You have the silk I ordered? I have it. High quality, as promised. 20 bolts of the best grade, plus some medium grade that I picked up in Khotan. Excellent. The market here is strong right now. There are Persian merchants in the city with cash to spend, and they're hungry for good Chinese silk. I think we can get a very good price. They spend the next several days negotiating with potential buyers. This is where Bunyat's journey culminates, turning the silk he's carried for 5 months into silver and gold. The Persian merchants are indeed willing to pay well, but they're also shrewd negotiators who know silk quality. They examine every bolt carefully, looking for flaws, testing the weave, checking the dye quality. They negotiate fiercely, trying to get the price down, while Bunyat and Patak try to maintain their asking price. Eventually, they settle on terms. The silk sells for about triple what Bunyat paid for it in Chang'an. But remember, he's had enormous expenses along the way. Supplies, caravanserais fees, guards, taxes and bribes, losses from theft and damage. When all the costs are accounted for, his profit is more modest, maybe 30% return on his initial investment. That might not sound like much, but for 5 months of work and risk, it's actually quite good. And he's made other small profits along the way through mid-route trading. Overall, the journey has been financially successful. What Samarkand reveals about the Silk Road, let's pause here and think about what Bunyat's journey reveals about how the Silk Road actually worked. First, it wasn't primarily about silk, despite the name. Yes, silk was important, but it was just one commodity among many. The real action was in the constant exchange of all kinds of goods at every step along the route. Second, no single merchant travelled the entire distance. Bunyat went from Chang'an to Samarkand. The Persian merchants he's selling to will carry the silk further west, maybe to Baghdad or Damascus or Constantinople, and there other merchants might buy it and carry it to still other markets. The silk makes a journey from China to Rome, but it passes through dozens of hands along the way. Third, the Silk Road worked because of infrastructure, the caravanserais, the trading cities, the banking systems, the diplomatic arrangements with local authorities. This infrastructure was maintained by the profits from trade, creating a self-sustaining system. Fourth, information flow was just as important as goods flow. Merchants constantly gathered and shared information about routes, markets, political situations. This information network made trade possible. And fifth, the Silk Road was never just about economics. Ideas, religions, technologies, artistic styles, cuisines, languages, all of these flowed along the trade routes, mixing and merging and creating new hybrid forms. Samarkand itself is evidence of this cultural mixing. The city has Persian architecture influenced by Sogdian styles. Buddhist monasteries stand alongside Zoroastrian fire temples and increasingly Islamic mosques. The bazaars sell goods from everywhere: Chinese silk and porcelain, Indian spices and gemstones, Persian glass and metalwork, steppe nomad furs and leather, Baltic amber, African ivory, and the people are just as mixed. You hear dozens of languages in the bazaars. You see a diversity of clothing styles, religious practices, cultural traditions. It's cosmopolitan in a way that few places in the medieval world were. The return journey. Bunyat doesn't stay in Samarkand long. After 2 weeks of rest, he's preparing for the return journey to China. But he won't return empty-handed. That would be economically foolish. Instead, he's buying goods that are valuable in Chinese markets: Persian glass, precious stones, medicines and spices, horses from Fergana, woolen, textiles. He's also changed his plans slightly. Instead of returning the way he came, he's going to take the northern route around the Taklamakan desert. Different route, different opportunities, different risks. The monk, Xuanzang, parts ways with the caravan in Samarkand. He pays his passage fee and disappears into the city. Bunyat never learns what his true purpose was. Maybe he really was a scholar. Maybe he was a spy. Maybe both. On the Silk Road, people's true identities and purposes were often ambiguous. The return journey will take another 5 months. More deserts, different mountains, new challenges. But Bunyat is experienced now. He knows what to expect. And he knows that if he survives this journey, he'll probably make it again next year and the year after that, because this is his life. The endless cycle of buying and selling, traveling and trading, risking and profiting. This is how the Silk Road worked. Not through grand historical forces or imperial policies, though those mattered, but through thousands of individual merchants like Bunyat, making the journey again and again, carrying goods and ideas across the barriers of distance and culture and language. As you let yourself drift towards sleep, think about what the Silk Road represents. It was never just about silk, never just about commerce. It was about human connection across vast distances. It was about the drive to trade, to exchange, to communicate that seems to be fundamental to human nature. The Silk Road connected civilizations that otherwise might never have known each other existed. Chinese emperors learned about Rome through Silk Road merchants. Romans wore silk without knowing where it came from or how it was made. Indians encountered Chinese philosophy. Chinese encountered Persian religions. Ideas cross-pollinated. Technologies spread. Cultures influenced each other in ways that shaped world history. Buddhism spread from India to Central Asia to China along these routes. Islam would later spread eastward along the same paths. Paper-making technology travelled from China to the Islamic world to Europe. Gunpowder and the compass would follow similar routes. Mathematical concepts from India reached the Islamic world and eventually Europe through the Silk Road network. And on a human level, it was about people like Bunyat, ordinary merchants who made extraordinary journeys, who risked their lives crossing deserts and mountains, who learned multiple languages and navigated complex cultural differences, all in pursuit of profit, yes, but also perhaps seeking adventure, seeking to see what lay beyond the next horizon. The Silk Road, in its classical form, eventually declined. New maritime routes offered faster, cheaper ways to transport goods between East and West. Political upheavals disrupted the overland routes. But its legacy remains, in the cities that grew along its path, in the cultural mixing that occurred, in the proof that human beings separated by vast distances and cultural differences can find ways to communicate, trade, and share ideas. Tonight, as you sleep, you've travelled that ancient road. You've crossed deserts where merchants' bones still lie buried in the sand. You've climbed passes where the air is too thin to breathe easily. You've rested in caravanserais that still stand, though now in ruins. You've walked through bazaars that still exist, though transformed by time. The Silk Road was never one road. It was thousands of roads, thousands of journeys, thousands of merchants like Bunyat making the crossing, taking the risks, making the connections that bound the world together. Sleep now. Dream of caravans crossing moonlit deserts. Dream of mountain passes touched by dawn light. Dream of ancient cities where goods from across the world met in vibrant bazaars. Dream of the Silk Road and how it actually worked. Good night.